Well, hello and happy St. Patrick's Day. Thanks so much for joining me here at Help Me Believe, the show about Christian apologetics and theology. My name is Haden Clark, your host, and I am very excited to introduce my special guest to you. She was the first interviewee that I had on the show, and so I'm excited to have her back on. Her name is Dr. Karen Swallow Pryor. Dr. Pryor, how are you doing today, ma'am?
I'm doing wonderful. I didn't realize that I was the first one way back then.
You
So it's a
were,
little,
yeah, way back when. It
oh,
seems like a long time ago. It was really only about a year or a little bit more ago. But yeah, I was just getting started in here on the YouTube land and the podcast land. And you were my first interviewee, and then we followed that up with J. Warner Wallace, and then things just kind of took off from there. So it's been going very well. But as I was saying before we got started here, last time you were on, I was getting over a sickness and sounded like crud, and you had just got hit by a bus, literally. And so I'm glad we're both in better health now. um, but for those who may not be familiar with who you are, or who didn't get to see the first episode, I thought it might be helpful if you gave a brief introduction about who you are and kind of what you do.
sure. Well, I am primarily an English professor at Liberty University, where I've been teaching for 21 years. I'm finishing up my last year this year and then taking a post beginning with the academic year in the fall as a research professor at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. I'll continue teaching English there and some some courses on cultures and Christianity. And so that will be a big shift for me. But it will bring together other things I've been doing in my life in recent years, which includes writing books and articles on literature, culture, politics, and things that affect the church, particularly my denomination of the Southern Baptist Convention.
Yeah, and congratulations on the new job, by the way. That must be very exciting. So are you looking forward to that? And what exactly does a research professor do? And how's that differ from what you've been doing?
Yeah, I am very much looking forward to it. It's very exciting. I'm a person who doesn't like change, so it's actually kind of a personal challenge, but that's good. It's good to be challenged and to adjust. And so the research professor post is different in that it has a lighter teaching load in order to allow me more time to write and speak and research, as the title suggests. So instead of teaching 4 classes a semester as I do now, I'll generally be teaching 2, and that will give me more time to do the public, fulfill that public role of speaking and writing.
Yeah. Well, the last time you were on, we were discussing your book on reading, and as an excellent book, I'll probably leave a link in the description for those who haven't read it yet to go get a copy. It's an excellent book that you should read. But just on the subject of books, what books are you currently reading?
Well, at the moment, because I'm on spring break, I picked up a novel that it is just one I've been wanting to read for a long time, and it's not for a class or for anything I'm writing about. And it's Wendell Berry's novel Hannah Coulter, and I'm really delighting in that. And of course, I just recently had the release of 2 classic works that I love and that I wrote introductions and reflection questions for, and those are Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility and Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. So I spent a lot of time immersed in those books over the past year in order to to reprint these editions with my notes and introductions.
Yeah. Are you getting an extra spring break right now as well?
Well, we are getting our 1 week of spring break, and then when it's over this week, we will resume our classes online, which will be a big challenge for most of us, especially me.
Yeah, it is nice that we have that luxury, but it can also be a challenge as well. So whenever I had you on last time, I confessed that I don't read a lot of fiction or a lot of literature. I'm kind of a nonfiction person. I'm reading like 5 to 10 nonfiction books at one time, at all times, just kind of going back and forth. That's just kind of how my brain works. But you did talk me into reading. I saw the benefit of needing to read some more fiction and literature, so I've been trying to do that. It kind of comes in spurts. If I find myself digging too deep into a nonfiction area, I go, I think I need a break for this for a little while, and I go read some fiction. But I'm interested in wondering if you do anything like that with nonfiction. I know you read a lot of literature and fiction it's kind of your job too. But do you read a lot of nonfiction?
Oh, I do read a lot of nonfiction. That's where the culture part of my new title comes in. I also, in the past year, co-edited a book with a colleague, Josh Shatrow, on cultural engagement. And so I do read widely in theology and philosophy and cultural analysis. I love being informed and reading those things. But it's just a delight to me to read great literature. But I need to ask you, so of the fiction works that you've read in the past year or so, since we spoke, which one did you appreciate and enjoy the most?
Oh man, this is. I knew, I knew that you were going to turn around and ask a question like that, and I should have been prepared. I did read Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. Please tell me I got that correct. He did
You,
write A Tale of Cities.
yes, yes, you read it, and what did you think?
I did. I did it. I enjoyed it. It was a good book. I also I didn't finish the book. I cheated and went and watched the movie about halfway through and watched Silence. Um,
Oh, okay. And what did you think of that? I mean, the film adaptation is pretty faithful and quite good.
yes.
So
So
an acceptable cheating.
yeah, the film was excellent. I thought it was very good. It caused me to think about a lot of things actually, and kind of reconsider kind of how you view things. You think, what if I was in that situation? How
Hmm.
would that go? But just because I am a person of faith, a Christian as well, obviously. But so I tend to think like that when I see things like that. It's like, well, what would I do if I was found myself in that situation? It's hard to tell. I mean, everybody wants to be the hero that
Hmm.
doesn't recount their faith or doesn't compromise. But then, it's like if somebody else's life is on the line, like you see in the
Right.
movie, it's not just about me; it's also about them. Like, what would I do? I have no idea. But yeah, it was a
Hmm.
very good film, and I did enjoy The Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. But
Oh, good. Well, I feel very successful now just hearing that you read those two works and some others. So great.
yeah, no, yeah, I mean, I am enjoying it, and I want to read some more. But my nonfiction regimen is just so intensive that I got to find time to do that. But so we do find ourselves in another election year, and so I think I first became familiar with who you are and your work. Actually, this is false. That's not true. I was going to say during the 2016 election, but I first became familiar with who you were because I believe another Eric Metaxas mentioned your work in one of his works, and I was like, oh, I want to go read that because I like the 18th century as well, and so he mentioned your book on. Hannah More. Sorry, I almost
Hmm.
forgot the name. And so I went and read that book as well. But I became very familiar with you during the 2016 election. You, I think it's fair to say, were critical of Trump and things like that. And so I felt like it was a voice that was well needed on the evangelical conservative Christian side to get another perspective like that. It's often very binary. Um,
Hmm.
do you agree with that? Were you critical of Trump in the 2016 election?
I was then and remain so today. So
Yes. Okay.
yes.
So that was going to be my question: is are we in 2020? Are you pretty much going to have the same approach as in 2016?
Mm. Yeah, that is a good question. It's a fair question. I um, still have the same concerns that I had about Trump in 2016, which were about his character. And not in the sense of, people will often say, well, we're all sinners, no one's perfect, and someone who has a bad character that doesn't disqualify them for a presidential office. We've certainly had plenty of bad characters
Yeah.
in that office, but it's really not. It's not just about being a flawed person or a sinful person, as we all are. It's about having the kind of character flaws that make you a very bad leader. And so I think that, name calling and disrespect and being ill informed or even, contradicting yourself and your daily messaging, that sort of thing is, I think that makes for a bad leader. I will say that one concern that I had in 2016 that I don't have anymore is that I didn't necessarily believe that Trump would keep his word on a number of policy promises, and he certainly, to his credit, has kept his word on his court appointments, on religious freedom and standing for the pro-life cause. And so he surprised me in that respect, and I'm I'm thankful for that. But again, there are enough problems I have with his leadership in general that I think are reflections of his character, that I would not be able in good conscience to vote for him this time around, even though I understand that there aren't very many good candidates at all, and
That's true.
and
We can
it's
agree on that for sure.
yeah, and so I certainly don't judge anyone for for voting for him when it comes down to it, because we really are in a difficult position. I just happen to believe that if we compromise less over the years in our voting, we would ultimately have better candidates. And that's a long-term strategy, and I get that a lot of people, are more concerned about the short term.
Yeah, good point. And again, this is exactly the message I was kind of hearing from you in 2016. And I thought, wow, that's a well balanced, and I very much appreciate that voice. I do actually come down on the side that, and I've already said this before, that I probably will vote for Trump in 2020, just like I did in 2016. But I share the same concerns and everything like that. It's just interesting how we can pretty much agree on all the facts of the matter, and then when it comes decision time, we come to different decisions, because I pretty much agree 100% with your analysis. And then, like you said, you kind of take into consideration that long term versus short term, and I think that's kind of where people have to make their decision. But I am interested to hear your response to this. You're kind of just touching on it right there with the short term versus long term. But what is your criticism of the position that, grant everything you just said, except given the choice between Trump and the Democrats that are running, I'm going with Trump every time? What is kind of your criticism of that position? Because I think that really is the modest position that most Trump conservative evangelicals who support Trump, I think that is the position that they take, which is, yeah, all your criticisms are correct. However, it's either him or the Democrats, so I'm going with him. How do you kind of answer that position?
Mentioned earlier in the conversation about the problem, you mentioned the binary, and we do tend to think in binary categories, not only in the two-party system in America, but even just as part of being citizens of the modern age. I mean, the modernity is really defined in large part by the binaries that have brought us to this point. And oftentimes we see those binaries as conflicts, like they're not real, but we think of, for example, faith and reason being in conflict, and we think of, male and female being in conflict, and black and white being in conflict. We often don't. It's just part of our culture to think of either or rather than both and. And for me, I mean, I have some bare minimum qualifications for someone before I would vote for them. One is, of course, that they have to be willing to protect the most vulnerable among us, and that includes unborn children. So someone who does not do that is not someone who would get my vote. And so that doesn't eliminate Trump, but it eliminates all of the Democratic candidates.
Yeah.
So because Trump doesn't meet another bare minimum qualification, such as not bragging about sexually assaulting women, then I can't vote for him either.
Right.
And so I will just look for a good third party candidate. There are usually, I have not been in a citizen in an election where there wasn't an acceptable third party candidate that I could either vote for or write in. And again, I understand many people think that's throwing the vote away. I think that compromising is throwing our country away in the long term, and that's how we got Trump. So
Well, that's a good response, because I mean, I'll be honest with you, I do view a third party vote that way. I don't think I would word it as you're throwing it away, or I might, but I see it as pretty ineffective, and I get the argument that you're making, and it makes perfect sense to me. I don't know, it just kind of seems almost like too impractical, almost too high and lofty for me personally, just speaking. That, yeah, I wish that the world were that way, and that I could just say, I'm not going to budge. Give me somebody better, or you're not getting my vote. That's pretty much what you're saying, right?
Right. Yeah, it
And
is.
it
And
makes sense. It's like, I'm not
right.
going to cater to you. You're going to, we're not, if everybody would just do what I'm doing, we might get better candidates.
Right.
And that
Right.
makes sense. You're correct. I just,
It just takes longer, a long, long time,
yeah.
like generations perhaps. And I think that we are
Uh huh.
seeing the fruit of generations of compromise in the
Mm-hmm.
political system. So,
Mm-hmm. And I guess the fear of on my side, or the people that might view things the way I do, is it. I agree. It would take generations for that to happen, and but the potential for things to go the wayside in between there are just far too great that a lot of people just wouldn't be willing to risk taking the long term
right.
position there.
I
Maybe
do understand. I do understand that. And it's just, it's just tough. And that's why I
it's
think,
a weird place. It's a weird place to be.
it is. And our conscience has to play a great
Yeah.
role. And I also respect people who vote, for these far less than perfect candidates, sort of reluctantly, in a way that I don't those who are so willing to overlook
Mm-hmm.
the severe
Yeah. Absolutely.
problems. Yeah.
It was very difficult for me for the exact reason that you mentioned, the braggadocious nature towards sexual assault, or at least speaking in such a manner. I have four sisters raised by my mom. I have a wife. We're having our first daughter. Like that
Oh,
concerns. Yeah, we
congratulations.
are. Yes, yes. My wife is pregnant with our first child, and it's a girl. So, I mean, I obviously don't want to hear somebody talking like that, let alone the president of the United States. So it was extremely difficult to do. Um, but what are some general principles that Christians should incorporate in their decision for voting?
Well, as I just described, I think that it's helpful to have sort of a list of bare minimum qualifications, and those are, for me, those are policy related. Some people will say things like, "Oh, we're not voting for a pastor, we're voting for a president," and yeah, I actually agree with that. I don't think that a president has to be a person that I would want for leadership in my church, or um, that's but I still think that the basic character requirements that we could have of a decent human being are ones that we should require of our leaders. And so I think, you know, we just have a list of things that qualify a person. And I hope for Christians those include, the big dignity and value of human life. That's, to me, a non-negotiable. There are other things, policy differences that we can have where we might agree on the same goal, but just disagree on how to get there. Um, so that's actually one of the reasons why I, you know, don't think I would ever vote for a Democrat, because there are so many policies that they support that I think end up, they may be trying to reach a goal that I share, but I think they end up not getting there in the long run. Again, it's more of a long term.
Yeah.
And so I just think that we need to um, have those qualifications, but also realize that we are a witness, and in a way that previous generations of Christians in this country have not been. We now have all these polls and surveys, and the word evangelical has been tainted in a way because of the pollsters and the surveys and the way that people respond to them without even necessarily understanding the term. And we've been defined in a way that I think doesn't reflect who we really are. And so there's a witness that we have that's at stake too. And so I think that's an important thing to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think that and I think you already touched on it a little bit, but do you think the Trump presidency has done good for the pro-life movement, and what good things have you seen for the pro-life movement here recently?
Well, I'm certainly thankful for the court appointments that he has made, not only for the pro-life movement, but simply for what I believe are the kinds of rulings that best protect the Constitution um, over the long haul. Conservative judges just tend to rule on cases that uphold the Constitution in a strict constructionist way rather than an activist way. And I think that's important. Yet we haven't seen any cases yet where we certainly haven't come close to seeing Roe versus Wade overruled. We have
Right.
some states that have passed legislation. It's just simply going to take a long time, and we also have to look back at history and recognize that judges that were considered conservative or appointed by conservative presidents haven't always ruled the way that
Yeah, that's
conservatives
correct.
would
Yeah.
want them to. So there are no guarantees, and so even though I do want to see pro-life legislation enacted, not only at the federal level, but across the country at every level. Um, Ultimately, politics, as a politician once said long ago, is downstream of culture,
Yeah.
and so we really, if we want those laws to change in a way that is holistic and healthy and life affirming, then we have to change the culture because we could a dictator could come along and outlaw abortion,
It's true.
but that would not be you know a way that we would want that to happen, just as we wouldn't want a dictator to allow all Baptists freedom of worship, but no one else, or something like that. I mean,
Right.
we have to be careful what we wish for, in the sense that that a law by itself is not going to be something that will protect life ultimately,
Sure.
if it's not in concert with other biblical values.
Sure. So, what are some key strategies as far as affecting the culture? Maybe not necessarily like voting and politics, but focusing on strategies to affect the culture for the pro-life movement going forward.
Well, this is where I really do look to the 18th century evangelicals that you mentioned before, Hannah More, whom I wrote a book about, and her fellow evangelicals like William Wilberforce. And again, we look across the pond at these evangelicals who work to not only abolish slavery in their lifetimes, but at the same time they were doing that, they were taking a multi-pronged, holistic approach to reform in all of society, from
Mm-hmm.
high to low, and they largely succeeded in a way that affected every area of life. Whereas in America, we do tend to be, focused on single issues. We did abolish slavery, but it required a civil war. And I think that the way that we abolish slavery with a war actually is the reason why we still continue to have huge problems with racial strife today. Whereas it was just entirely different in England, because they used an incremental method, chipping away at it and changing hearts and minds through popular culture, through poetry, through literature, through art. And that's what we need to do. There is no one size fits all. We have to change all of society with every means at our disposal, and that means equipping and empowering Christians where they are, to take that message and to promote that message. And that's why we can't bracket away a so-called pro-life president who actually is part of the demand side of abortion by objectifying women and treating them disrespectfully, because that's the kind of behavior that actually contributes to an abortion mentality.
Yeah, that's a good point. Uh, I don't know how to segue into the next question. We're both dog lovers. We love dogs around here. How many dogs do you have? That's about as good as that one's gonna get. I didn't know how to go from what you just said to my next question.
No, well, just at least you provided a transition. I grade a lot of papers, and sometimes I'll say a good transition is hard to find. It can be tough, but
it's a memorable transition at least.
Yeah, it is.
So we're both dog lovers. How many dogs do you have? What are their names? What kind of dogs are they?
I have two dogs. One is a German short-haired pointer named Ruby, and the other is a Weimaraner named Eva. And two is our limit. We had three dogs in the past, but we just didn't like the way they sort of devolved into pack behavior with three. But with two are a delight, because they love one another and play with one another, but they don't get overly jealous of one another. And so those are our dogs. What about yours?
Yeah, we have two as well. I'm gonna tell my wife what you just said, so she'll stop sending me pictures every day. Can we get this one? We're gonna open because we just got a new house, and I put a fence up for the dogs to finally have a fence to go outside in a big backyard. And she's like, with this new backyard, we can just have an animal shelter. And I was like, what are you talking about?
And a
We're
new
not getting
baby.
any more
Wow,
dogs.
you're ambitious.
So she had a beagle before we got married. And then while we were engaged, I must confess that I brought home a miniature Australian Shepherd. And so that's
Aw.
Andy the Beagle and Arlo the mini Aussie. And they're best buds most of the time. We had a period where the Aussie was growling and trying to fight the Beagle. And so every once in a while he still does it, but I think they're good now. Happy that we just gave them a great big backyard. I'm going to try and get a doggy door for them into the garage so they can kind of have a shelter in place. So I'm happy that we're going to get to give them that. I've been wanting to give them that for a while. I do have a soft spot for animals for all the listeners, especially the dogs. And I don't know. So I do Christian apologetics and philosophy mostly. I love having you on and other people in the evangelical circles so I can kind of have a break from that and talk about other things. And so that's just kind of where my mind naturally tends. I don't know why I have this soft spot for dogs. I can't figure it out rationally or objectively. I just feel that way. Like we eat animals, and dogs are animals, but for some reason I just want to treat dogs really well. But why is that? Is there an objective case for this, Dr. Pryor?
Oh, wow. This could be a whole show or two in itself.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I love all animals. I'm a big animal lover, and I've had horses. I've been a horse person most of my life, although I don't have any now. I just board a couple. But dogs are just, I can't imagine life without dogs. And I wrote a piece a few years ago on the death of one of my dogs about just how hard it is when a dog dies. And it's actually one of my favorite pieces that I've ever written, because what I wrote in the conclusion is, and this, this applies to all pets, but again, dogs are more special. They're more equal than than the other animals on Animal Farm. By the way, Animal Farm is a book you should read if you haven't read it. You would love it, by George Orwell.
I'll make a note. Yes.
It's a political satire.
Oh,
and
it's by George Orwell. I believe I've read 1984, so I don't think
you would
I've read.
you would love Animal Farm, but that was a line that some animals are more equal than others.
Yeah.
So what I wrote is, it's an analogy, and so any discernment bloggers out there who want to seize this and take it out of context, I'm sure they will. This is just simply an analogy. But the way that dogs depend on and love us, I think, in some ways reflects the way that we depend on and love God, and that the way that he cares for us, because we're so much smaller than him and so much less, we understand so much less, and we depend on him and we love him because he loved us. That's really just a faint reflection. I think when we love dogs in that same, we're like their God.
Yeah. No, that's a perfect analogy. I get it.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, thank you.
I think that's really good because
I wrote it much better, but that was the gist of it.
No, that definitely sounds good to me. It sounds like, look, given the choice, if you have anything or anyone who's weak and in some sense weak and dependent upon you for survival or for basic necessities or something like a dog, obviously, your moral obligation would be to, at the very least, not be a jerk to them. I'm not saying you have to sacrifice your life to provide their necessities, but obviously if you have that means. I thought you were actually going to go that it resembles the analogy between a parent and a child is what I thought you were going to go with that.
Well,
but that works as
it's,
well. It's basically the same concept there.
Right,
but,
right.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
The distance is so great, like between us and animals, but even more so between us and God. But there's an analogy there. It's very powerful, I think. And the other objective reason why dogs are so great. Now that the discernment bloggers can go nuts with this, but dog is God spelled backwards.
It is. It's man's best friend, and it's God spelled backwards. So yeah, y'all can blog about that. I got one last question for you, Dr. Pryor, before we go to the bonus segment. Before we get to the last question of the interview, I want to say thank you to all of our patron supporters for all of your support. It's because of your support that I get to make free content like this and put it out there on the internet to spread and defend the truth of Christianity. So thank you so much. If you want to become a supporter of the show, or if you'd like to see the bonus segment with Dr. Pryor, and not only that bonus segment, but all of the bonus segments that we've had so far and will have in the future, you can just follow the Patreon link in the description below and become a patron supporter over there. Dr. Pryor, one last question before we go. What work of literature outside of scripture, and I mean like a classical work of literature, does everybody need to read?
Well, that's such a hard question, but I'm going to say that I think, especially for Christians, everyone needs to read Jane Eyre. And if you're not familiar with it and you just remember it from high school, or you've heard of it, it is much, much more than a romance or a love story. It is really an allegory for a Christian soul finding her way in a culture that is, that doesn't believe what she believes, and she has to fight temptations to go against her beliefs, and she has to find her way to herself and her nature as someone made in God's image. And it's just a powerful allegory of the Christian soul.
And it's called Jane. What was
Jane
it?
Eyre
Oh,
by
okay.
Charlotte Bronte.
Okay, there you go, folks. You heard it here first. Go get that book as well as Dr. Pryor's book on reading. I'll leave a link in the description to that. And again, if you want to watch the bonus segment, 5 more minutes with Dr. Karen Pryor, just follow the Patreon link in the description below and become a supporter. Dr. Pryor, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me once again.
Thank you.